This year marks the 50th anniversary of one of the most important environmental laws in our nation's history, the Federal Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act established the basic framework for protecting our water resources by regulating the release of pollutants to lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands. Since its implementation, Michigan has taken significant steps to go above and beyond the Clean Water Act's goals. Here at Eagle, we work hard to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the waters in Michigan. Visit michigan.gov/CWA50 to celebrate Michigan's accomplishments over the last 50 years.
This is the People's Water Board Coalition Water Wednesday webcast for December 7th, 2022.
Welcome. We are back again, beloved community, with yet another installment of the People's Water Board Coalition's Water Wednesdays webcast. And today we have the pleasure of having a very special guest, someone that's near and dear to both of our hearts and is a powerhouse in the community. She is the managing editor of Riverwise magazine, and she's an activist extraordinaire, Miss Megan Douglas. Thank you for being here, Megan.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's really, I'm really great that you're here. And this is a really much requested show to talk about what it looks like after this really important election for the water legislation that we've been, if our listeners have been following us since the beginning of the year, we've been talking to different legislators about the bills that are being pushed to protect groundwater, to protect people from getting shut off and things like that. So this was really requested show. So thank you for being
here. Of course, yeah.
Yeah, it's
hopefully
such
I do that. Hopefully I do everybody justice.
Sure that you will. I have no worries about it, whatever. It's a short show, so I'm going to jump right into it. Can you talk about the election here and really what happened and why it's so important, why it's such an important moment that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a couple of things that came out of this. It's been a long process too. I think with the election of Governor Whitmer in 2018, living through a pandemic, currently ongoing, and then some unprecedented things that happened. I think a lot of things started to become a lot more clear for people. Sometimes people have a hard time understanding somebody else's situation until they go through it, for whatever it's worth, or until they see how it's going to affect them. And I think, unfortunately, for a lot of people, it took a pandemic and understanding how important our water is, to understand why they should care about other people's need for access to water. So
That's right.
Very clearly it became clear, I don't want somebody who's unable to wash their body or wash their hands in my space. So we probably shouldn't turn off people's water, right? Because all of a sudden we start to understand that saying water isn't a human right isn't just like people trying to, be lazy and take over resources. Right. It's saying that like this is a natural resource that is a public common. It should be, and that nobody should be denied access to that. And so I think it like crystallized for a lot of people what people have been saying for years.
Yeah.
It gave them a concrete example of it. And unfortunately it had, the ramifications of that being the reality was that a lot of people had to, pass away or go without, for people to come to that understanding.
Yeah.
But I think it did also, there's a lot of times in organizing work, people talk about finding the failure in, or finding the opportunity in failures. And I think that those understandings helped people see that, this rhetoric about needing strong social safety networks isn't radical. It's not radical at all. It's just basic common sense and basic human decency. And so in Michigan, it's clear, especially because on top of a pandemic, then we had dioxin plumes. In Washtenaw, we've got PFAS all over the place, right? So there's people in Benton Harbor, Flint, Detroit are still dealing with lead in their water. So I think people started to understand, I need to be listening to candidates who are talking about that a little bit more. Because it's not like once your life becomes affected, right? Once your grandma gets thyroid cancer, once, your backyard is no longer livable, it starts to make more sense.
Yeah. So people came out in droves to vote people in that were already trying to pass and have been for years trying to pass good water legislation here in Michigan. And it was a relief for so many of us the day after, because okay, now we actually have a chance for the things that we've been pushing for that's important to everybody. Like this legislation, like protecting the groundwater from companies, and like remediating the groundwater right after it's been poisoned, all these types of things. Like we have to if it's not legislation, it won't get done. Certainly the corporations are not going to hold themselves accountable in any way, shape, or form. The only way to do it was to get people out to vote these. It was a huge.
And we see prime evidence of corporations not being accountable with Line 5 with Enbridge. We see it right there. We saw it with Nestle as they continued, now Blue Triton, as they continue to drain our underground aquifers.
Well, that's one of the biggest water packages is the Stop the Bottled Water loophole and that's one that Yusuf Rabi talked about how important it was. We're going to share throughout the week, folks, to our listeners, the Water Wednesdays where we had these representatives on so they can hear about these bills again and kind of keep them. But that was the biggest thing, was closing that bottled water loophole that the corporation had kind of really created for themselves, which was so crazy.
Yeah. I think one thing also to keep in mind about this latest election. So first, I think we all need to keep in mind that when we are going out to vote, and like who we're selecting, we often talk about voting, sometimes people are a little bit ambivalent about voting because they don't see how it brings about change. And
yeah,
I think when we're talking about these local elections, and right now in a context in which Michigan hasn't had Democratic control over a legislature in 40 years. And it's not just the legislature. We've got the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, a Supreme Court that has a number of progressive candidates. And I think if we look back, we're talking about holding corporations responsible, for example. If you look back to the 1990s, Michigan actually used to have the strongest polluter pay laws in the country, right? So we clearly, and doing the work also, the work that I do with For Future Michigan to speak to people across the state about what matters to them most. Water is always, right? That cuts across everybody's agenda, right? So no matter whether or not you're up in the UP or on the west side of the state, you are wherever, Michigan's water is really important to everybody. And I think what we've forgotten is that when people always talk about, oh, there's a lesser of two evils. Well, when you have a party that has decided that aligning themselves with corporations and seeing corporations as just as equal to a human being. Like that's a difference that might seem like by a degree, but it creates really, really, really big impacts, right? And so, you know, Michigan had those polluter pay laws, and then Governor Engler got in and gutted them. Right? And so it's been since 1995 that we haven't had those rules. And as we see, I mean, we had green ooze coming out of the highway on 696.
Corporations, the whole muck, all
Yeah,
the way, which is why the whole
exactly.
covered. If we still had those things in place, do you think the whole state would be covered in PFAS?
No.
You
Right.
think
And if it was, and if it, even if, you know, because here's the thing where corporations are like generally like going to behave badly.
Yeah.
And so it's first about like, again, this is about like harm reduction. So like we first need that oversight to come back over what corporations are doing. But then when they do something, it shouldn't be on our tax-paying dollars to clean up their BS.
Yeah, if
Not
they were,
only that, yeah, but we also, not only should the taxpayers, it shouldn't be on the back of the taxpayers, but also we need those laws back, because there has to be some form of accountability to these corporations. And if they don't follow the rules of accountability, there needs to be some definite repercussions for them not being in compliance as well.
Yeah.
where
There's actually, you know, there's legislation. Again, this is where who's in power matters. And this is where we really get a chance at this point to see people put, you know, put your vote where your mouth is, right? So there has been legislation introduced to bring back polluter pay laws, but again, those haven't gone anywhere because we had a legislature that is like really, really fundamentally opposed to making, you know, their corporate cronies accountable to the harms that they create. You know, I think that they're all ready to get in Elon Musk's spaceship to Mars after they destroy this earth. And so yeah, like I think there's some opportunities for us to be able to push for legislation that's already written, right? Like you've talked about this package of bills that Robbie, I think HUD and Pohutsky have introduced that protect groundwater, that like make sure that like our service lines get cleaned up, that make sure that kids have access to healthy, safe, clean water in their schools. And that stops, like you said, Nestle, or I didn't even know they had a new name now, but that stops them from extracting our groundwater and profiting off of it. Like while people go without. It's so there's real opportunity.
You're great having a statewide water protection plan for everybody. That would, I mean, having a state, first of all, it would be we'd be one of the first to do it. It's already legislation that's been drawn up and introduced, something that we can push for. But that would save lives in so many lives, and be one of, you know, something that we could champion. We could be the first state to do that, and that's, you know, that's what we've been fighting for. Water affordability plan, something that says you can't shut off people's water. And that's, you know, it just seems important that that we actually do our due diligence and get these things.
Yeah.
Because we don't know when another opportunity will arise, right? To do it this way. The only other way to do that, all out in the streets, right?
Well, and I mean, it still has to be that. I think one of the really big things that has been different, especially in the last 4 years, is that for the first time in a long time, you saw people out in the streets, right? Like people have actually been doing both, right? Like they've been in the streets and they've been in the legislative spaces too. So that it can't just, you know, so first of all, we know politicians are going to act based on whatever is going to get them reelected.
Exactly.
And so they have to know that we're like, hey, okay, you're in power. We want this polluter pay stuff to pass.
We want it done.
Right? Hey, you're in power. We want this groundwater provision to pass. We want them to stop it, And so it's like, it's a moment to like take a breath for sure, because you have now legislators in power who are beholden to a little bit more humane of a mandate, right? But still there has to be pressure. Because I was just reading, I think and I don't want to like misrepresent, but like 2 of our Democratic leaders, for example, take big money from DTE, right? So what's going to be their, their, like, if they're not hearing from their constituents directly, but they're getting that money, like, yeah, you really still got to make your voice heard, especially because we have this really, really insidious process that it takes millions of dollars for somebody to get elected. And yeah.
And the thing about DTE too is they just raised their, I mean, they doubled our, literally 50%, raised our bills 50. And that's what, going into the winter, it's going to be really, really hard for Michiganders. We're going to have to go, we're going to have to go this. That's not.
But I do think that with that, which, I understand that our issues focus on water, but you can't really separate water from like DTE or housing, because all of that is a result of deep and severe poverty.
Yeah.
Whether it's here, whether it's in the UP. And I know that people in the UP are going to get hit extremely hard when winter gets here, because it's much colder up there. And but I will say that it showcases that this is not just a Detroit problem. It's just not an urban problem. It's not a Black problem. It's a poverty problem. People cannot afford to pay these high costs for water. People should not have to pay for contaminated water, and people can't even afford to pay these high costs of utility rates with their gas and electric as well. It's a systemic poverty issue, and I think that our legislators need to, one, look at it that way, but also realize that there's nobody lining up to say, oh, you know what? When I grow up, I want to be poor. That's what I'm going for. That's not what's happening, and there needs to be some type of conditions, especially with water, and I'm sure with utilities, where they let these big commercial properties and corporations get away with bloody murder. I'm tired of seeing people struggle to pay their water bills, when I know for a fact that a bunch of big corporations right in downtown Detroit still owe DWSD 5- and 6-figure water bills, and nothing's being done about it.
Yeah. Well, there's the intention, right? Mass water shutoffs, up the DTE bills, mass tax foreclosure. There's the intention of moving people off of that land and giving it to developers, which is exactly what we've seen. We've been saying it since 2013, and from that time forward, that's exactly what we've seen happen, right? Property management companies come in, scoop up big, huge swaths of land, 26, 36, 38, whatever, all at one time. And then we can't afford it anymore. People can't live there anymore. It's all really, really intentional, which is why
it's by design. It's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
Implemented why we fight for a water affordability plan, because people are dying without water. They're getting very, very sick. Nicole's one of those people. She got very, very sick when she got her water shut off, and she never from it. She is still sick to this day from it. So it's like that the legislation has to be put there. it feels good to finally find ourselves in a moment to where we can do it. But as you said, Megan, we're going to have to for it, you know, and make our voices heard. What are some of the Megan, people can do now to
So there's a
kind of-
couple of things. I mean, even just today, I'm not even 100% sure what time the vote is, but for example, there's this recycling legislation, and I got a notification from Michigan LCV that there's a vote today. And so mostly everybody kind of thought, okay, this is going to be a pretty quiet lame duck because there's not really much they can do. But there is a package of legislation about recycling. And right now the Senate is trying to pass through a little amendment to the bill that passed the House already, to recategorize like burning of incinerator plastics and all those kinds of things as advanced recycling or chemical recycling. But really, it's just using that incinerator model that like we already know is bad.
Yeah.
And so there are do you guys like share out links? Because we can like share out links for people to like
Yeah,
make
share 'em
calls.
in the-
Yeah,
soon as-
and then, yep, and then they can also start making calls to your legislators about supporting the legislation that Robbie Hood and Pohutsky are going to be introducing. And then also that polluter pay stuff, that's like in the can ready to go, right? So it's already written, it's already there. Like, so people can call, and I can share some links with you guys.
I'll get the link from Stephanie too for the water shutoff protection act, and see, you know, what that looks like to reintroduce it. And we're going to have her on the show.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Yeah, they have legislation. They have legislation in the can ready to go that's been introduced in session after session, and it's been ignored because it's just got too much of a human focus, you know, and this is across the board. And, you know, I think it's also a time for us like to really, so it's a time for us to like dig in and say, okay, hey, here are the things that we want to get done. But it's also a really good time right now to like build relationships with those legislators. And, you know, even figure out what it is, you know, because sometimes they'll tell you what they need, you know,
Right.
to get things done. And that's really key because they're just one person who's up against all kinds of different personalities and motives and agendas when they're introducing things. And so really knowing that in what ways we as citizens can be supportive, and what they'll know too, you know, like, hey, make this call to this office, or like show up to this thing, or, you know, speak at this thing. And, you know, I don't always like to tell people that they have to like, you know, serve themselves up as like prostrate to the state, like, please, sir, can I have whatever, and tell your, you know, always have to tell your sad story. But it really is impactful, and it really does work, right? To show.
And I think they need to hear the stories
Mhm.
because it shows the human aspect
Mhm.
of it. It's not a bunch of numbers of residences that have been cut off or a number of statistics for PFAS. It shows the human aspect, and people can tell their stories and show the repercussions of water shutoffs and water contamination and lead pipes. That's what they need to see. They need to see the children that are damaged by lead. They need to see the people that were poisoned by PFAS. They need to understand what happens when your water is cut off and you have to live without it, so that they can see this is not just about numbers or even about finances. This is about human lives, and that's what they need to see.
And also, you know, because on the other side of that, I think even when people don't understand what it means to have your water shut off, right? On the flip side, they do understand what it feels like to be fearful of whether or not, even if you have water, you should be using or drinking it.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have these two hand in hand issues where it's like, I can shut your water back on, but should you even be using that water?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and so, we really have to start to say that these issues aren't like separate, that our issues are not separate, right?
Yeah.
That whether or not you're in a mansion in Grosse Pointe or you are struggling with housing in Detroit, that like all of our issues are connected when it comes to water. And that like nobody's asking for anything crazy. Nobody's asking for anything wild. We just want
safe, clean water, safe, affordable water, just water.
You would think something we all need to survive would.
It sometimes I try to find the humor in it, because it's like they're literally asking, like we're asking, can everybody have, the minimum 5-bedroom mansion in a nice BMW in the driveway, and then we'll drink bottled water if you do that for us. Like, nobody, we're asking for basic life necessities.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And we're not just doing it for ourselves, right? We're doing
not altruistic. It's
we
for
love-
everyone.
Yes. This was such a great point somebody made last night. I want to make sure I don't say it wrong. They said something like all of us sometimes care about other people's safety, but abolitionists care about everyone's safety everywhere.
That's right.
And like that's what this is about. It's not just that I need clean water in my home. It's that everybody deserves it. And like when we work, it's that same thing. When you work towards whatever the most vulnerable people are, then when you're not vulnerable, you're also going to benefit from it because you make sure that everybody's taken care of.
That's right. That's just a beautiful way to, we just go, everybody's taken care of. I feel like so touched by this conversation. We don't always get to have conversations where you're able to feel hopeful. And so having that, and I appreciate it. Thank you for always going on this journey with me. Thank you, Lou and Rosalind, in the background doing all the techie stuff. Super important. Megan, thank you for everything you do every day to make the world a better place.
Yes.
It truly is important. And I always tell people that you're the connector of people, you really are. And it helps us all grow because of it. To our listeners out there, do the best that you can. Get out there, get in the streets, get in the voting booths, do everything that you can in your wheelhouse to do the same. The world a better place. Try to take care of each other. Try to stay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you guys. I appreciate you.
And we appreciate you, Megan. Thank you, because I know your schedule is super busy.
Never